This critique examines a set of submitted finance materials arguing that an organization's reliance on Excel is not a software problem, but rather a symptom of deep underlying architectural gaps. Restructuring the narrative to front-load the stakes of real-time compliance will transform this piece from a theoretical architectural discussion into an urgent strategic mandate.
Yeah, because we really need to look at how this piece currently sequences its central threat, you know?
Right.
The author introduces this, massive paradigm-shifting reality, continuous transaction controls, or CTCs.
Oh, the real-time compliance mandates.
Exactly. The mandate for machine-generated, real-time compliance. But, and this is the crazy part, they place this at the very end of the blog post excerpt.
Just tucked away.
Yeah, it's tucked away under the heading, The Real Danger. And because this existential threat is entirely backloaded, the vast majority of the preceding material reads like, well, a smart but ultimately optional efficiency play.
It feels a bit like writing a brilliant comprehensive manual on fire safety, but only mentioning that the building is currently on fire in the postscript.
Oh, wow, yes. That is exactly what it feels like.
The material makes a strong case for an architectural overhaul by highlighting the historical reasons Excel became the default universal adapter. I mean, how it filled the gaps between rigid ERP platforms and the fluid requirements of actual finance teams.
Right. It was the universal Band-Aid for decades.
Totally. But without placing that immediate external threat at the beginning, the stakes simply remain too low for a CFO to sign a multi-million-dollar transformation check.
I want to dig into why leaving CTCs to the end fundamentally dilutes the argument. Finance leaders have been living with the chronic pain of slow reconciliations and manual alignment work for, forever.
Yeah, they have whole departments for it.
Right. They have built massive, highly paid teams specifically to manage those manual Excel workarounds. If the argument rests purely on operational efficiency, the reader is likely to think, yes, our system is messy, but it currently works.
It's a known pain.
Exactly. Is there a risk that focusing solely on operational efficiency in the beginning might overlook the actual market reality driving these transformations today? We're moving rapidly into a landscape where tax authorities are embedding themselves directly into the transaction lifecycle.
I think we should explain the mechanism of how that actually works, because it's the crux of why Excel fails in this new world.
Go for it.
In a traditional setup, it's basically a batch process. A company does a bunch of sales, humans download a CSV file at the end of the month, manipulate it in Excel, and send a summary to the government.
And Excel is the perfect tool for batch processing.
It's amazing for it. But under a continuous transaction control framework, the government requires the transaction data to be cleared and validated before the invoice is even legally issued to the customer.
Wait, really? Before the invoice goes out?
Yes. We are talking about machine-to-machine validation occurring in milliseconds.
And a manual spreadsheet step mathematically cannot exist in a millisecond transaction flow. It is structurally incompatible with the law.
Right.
By saving that reality for the final paragraphs, the author is hiding the single most compelling reason to fund this massive architectural shift. If an organization does not adapt to this, they will literally lose their license to operate in jurisdictions with these mandates.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second, though. If we lead with the terrifying threat of regulatory compliance, do we risk, alienating readers who are genuinely just looking for a faster month-end close? Does it make the piece feel too alarmist?
I don't think it does, provided it's framed correctly. Actually, it elevates the conversation. You aren't just selling them a faster month-end close. You are selling them immunity to regulatory disruption.
Makes sense.
So the suggestion here is to weave the urgency of real-time compliance and CTC mandates directly into the introduction. It needs to be the primary catalyst for why this architectural shift must happen right now.
We just take that incredible insight from the conclusion and put it front and center.
Exactly.
To see what this looks like in practice, the opening paragraph of the article could explicitly contrast the historical role of Excel with the impending reality of CTCs.
Yeah, hit them with the contrast early.
Right. The author could note right up front that while Excel was the perfect universal adapter for a batch processing world, global regulatory frameworks now demand speeds, semantic standardization, and automated validations that a desktop spreadsheet simply can't handle.
We can also reframe the introduction of the proposed solutions like the canonical data model and the data orchestration layer.
Uh-huh.
Instead of introducing these highly technical concepts merely as a way to fix slow group reporting,
Frame them immediately as the only viable defense against real-time compliance failures.
That makes the jargon mean something. A canonical data model isn't just a clean database. It's the engine that ensures your data is uniformly formatted so a government API doesn't reject your transaction and halt your entire supply chain.
Stakes are so much higher.
Huge stakes. When you state in the first 5 minutes of reading that failure to implement a data orchestration layer means you will be legally barred from operating in certain markets, you command the immediate, undivided attention of every executive reading the piece.
It completely changes the reader's posture. They stop reading it as an IT infrastructure pitch and start reading it as a strategic risk mitigation roadmap.
And here's the pivot. Shifting to a fully automated real-time compliance model creates a massive new problem. If the machine is now doing the work of 20 Excel experts, what happens to the deeply embedded institutional memory those experts hold?
Oh, that is the million-dollar question.
Which is the perfect transition into our next area of focus, harmonizing the identified causes of failure with the proposed architectural solutions will ensure the argument doesn't accidentally undermine its own brilliant warning about tacit knowledge.
This is perhaps the most fascinating logical tension in the submitted material. The author is incredibly astute in diagnosing why past technology implementations have failed.
Yeah, the diagnosis is spot on.
In the blog post section outlining the 4 reasons Excel elimination programs fail, they specifically highlight 2 deeply human factors. Reason 2 states that organizations underestimate the tacit knowledge embedded in complex Excel macros.
Right, the logic hidden in the code.
And reason 4 states that they fail to invest in the human capability to govern whatever system replaces Excel.
The diagnosis clearly identifies that ignoring the human element leads to failure. But here's the disconnect. Later in the material, the author outlines the 3 conditions that make Excel obsolete.
Yep.
Condition 1 is a canonical data model. Condition 2 is real-time data availability. Condition 3 is configurable compliance tools.
They are exclusively technical.
Exactly. They are purely technical. Let's look closely at the section discussing the 3 conditions. If the author explicitly states that losing institutional memory and human governance causes these programs to fail, can true enterprise architecture ever be considered purely technological?
It's a massive blind spot. The author builds this beautiful, nuanced argument that an Excel spreadsheet isn't just a container for data, it is institutional logic managed by human experts.
It's a living system.
Yeah, but when it comes time to provide the architectural blueprint for the solution, those human experts entirely vanish from the framework.
How can an architecture be complete if it just leaves the people out?
That's clearly laid out. I wonder, though, if we've considered how leaving out the human element in the solution section creates a trap for the reader who is actually trying to implement this framework.
What do you mean by a trap?
Well, imagine a finance leader following this blueprint to the letter. They secure the budget, build the canonical data model, deploy the orchestration layer, and set up the compliance tools.
They check all the boxes.
Right, they check all 3 boxes. According to the author's own earlier premise, that transformation program is still going to fail because the leader didn't architect the human governance required to run it.
Oh, I see. Let's talk about the mechanism of tacit knowledge for a second, because it explains why this is so critical. A complex Excel macro isn't just a string of code.
No, not at all.
It represents a financial controller's 10 years of hard-won experience dealing with quirky Italian tax laws or highly specific vendor rebates.
Yeah, the stuff that's not in any manual.
Exactly. That logic, the unwritten rule that says if client X pays from subsidiary Y, route it to account Z, lives almost entirely inside that macro and inside the head of the human who built it.
And if you just delete that spreadsheet and install a data orchestration layer, the system breaks because the machine doesn't know the unwritten rules.
So the suggestion to resolve this is to introduce a human-centric condition 4 to the list of architectural requirements.
I love that. It explicitly bridges the gap between technological implementation and human execution.
The architecture of a modern finance function is a socio-technical system. It requires the humans and the machines to work in a newly defined equilibrium.
So what does Condition 4 actually look like on the page?
Well, the author could create a section titled Condition 4, Institutionalized Logic and Evolved Governance.
Okay, nice and formal.
Yeah, and under this heading, they need to explain exactly how a company extracts that tacit knowledge from a senior finance manager's brain and codes it into the orchestration layer.
Because it shouldn't just be treated as a training exercise after the software is bought.
Exactly. It must be an explicit, funded phase of the architectural build. You have to sit the Excel macro wizard down with the data engineers to map the logic.
That brings up a vivid realization for the reader. The text needs to show the human transition. We need to detail a specific step where finance professionals are intentionally upskilled.
What does that transition look like?
The text should outline how a team member transitions from being a manual data preparer, someone whose entire job is downloading a CSV, running a VLOOKUP, and copying it into a ledger.
The human API.
Yeah, the human API. They transition from that into an automation architect. The aha moment for the reader should be realizing that their current Excel wizard isn't going to be fired by this automation.
They are going to be promoted.
Yes, they will be the ones governing the exception handling of the new architecture layer.
Showing that human transition as a required architectural condition validates the author's earlier warning. It tells the professionals reading the piece your expertise isn't being deleted by a canonical data model. Your expertise is being elevated to govern it.
It makes the cure match the diagnosis perfectly.
So now we have a complete architecture, both human and machine, and we've established incredibly high stakes in the introduction. The final challenge is refining the delivery of the text.
Right, the actual reading experience.
Varying the rhetorical structure in the diagnostic sections will prevent the reader from skimming past the highly valuable technical insights.
The structure of a piece of writing really dictates the rhythm of the reader's thoughts. And in both the article and the blog post excerpts, the author relies heavily on a parallel, almost clinical formatting structure.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
We see sequential headers like if Excel is used for reconciliation, if Excel is used for regulatory reporting, if Excel is used for consolidation, and if Excel is used for forecasting.
Very repetitive.
Very. And under each of these, the text immediately follows a rigid formula, starting with Excel-based X reveals.
Okay, so what I really like about this part is the incredible clarity. The author leaves zero ambiguity. They are directly mapping a specific spreadsheet behavior to a specific system failure.
Oh yeah, it shows immense domain expertise.
It does. But how can the author maintain this incredibly clear mapping of symptoms to diseases without making the text sound like a medical textbook? The rhythmic, repetitive structure creates a lulling effect.
Building on that point, what if we looked at it from the perspective of the high-level business readers who actually experience these problems daily?
Right.
Because it's a highly repetitive cadence. While it establishes a strong, authoritative voice, it inadvertently trains the deeply technical reader to start skimming.
Their eyes just glaze over.
Exactly. The first point lands beautifully. Excel-based reconciliation is a symptom of data not being in a standardized format. But by the time the reader gets to the fourth one, their eyes are just gliding over the text, searching for the bold words.
The cognitive friction is completely gone.
When every section looks and sounds identical, the brain assumes the information is identical, and the distinct, critical architectural gaps lose their individual impact.
And like you said, these aren't just sterile theoretical data routing issues to a CFO or controller. These are high-stress, late-night, deeply frustrating business realities. The text needs to reflect the visceral reality of that friction.
So the suggestion is to shift away from pure diagnostic formulas and instead use brief, evocative scenarios that ground the architectural gaps in the daily friction experienced by finance teams.
Break the pattern.
Break the visual and rhythmic pattern of the text, but keep the diagnostic utility intact.
Let's ground this in a scenario. Instead of using the repetitive header, if Excel is used for consolidation and group reporting, the author could use a scenario-driven header like the month-end entity scramble.
Oh, any accountant reading that will instantly feel stressed.
Exactly. That immediately invokes a recognized painful reality for the target audience. It pulls them in emotionally before hitting them with the technical explanation.
We need to explain the mechanics of that pain, specifically the concept of semantic alignment, which the author mentions but leaves a bit abstract.
Yeah, semantic alignment sounds incredibly dry.
right? But what does it actually look like on the floor of a finance department? It looks like a financial controller sitting at their desk at 11 o'clock, staring at 3 different screens.
Pulling their hair out.
Yes, trying to figure out why the UK office logs revenue under the category sales, the US office logs it under gross receipts, and the German office logs it under something else entirely.
And the human is manually fixing it row by row. They are the semantic layer.
Exactly.
The author can describe that exact tangible pain before revealing the architectural diagnosis. They could write, picture the controller spending 3 days manually aligning different currencies and misaligned charts of accounts across 5 subsidiaries.
Which happens all the time.
This workbook is manually doing the semantic alignment that a proper canonical data model acting as a universal translator would enforce automatically at the source.
That is so much stronger.
By creating a tiny narrative first, you hook the reader's empathy, explain the mechanism of the failure, and then deliver the technical payload of the solution.
It transforms the text from a dry list of symptoms into a mirror reflecting the reader's actual operational trauma. And you can alternate the structure to keep them guessing.
Yeah, mix it up.
Maybe one section is a brief scenario about the month-end scramble. The next section could be a direct provocative question, like, why is your tax provision always 3 days late?
But constantly shifting the pattern, you force the reader to stay alert. They cannot skim, because the rhetorical delivery keeps evolving, which keeps them actively engaged with the immensely valuable architectural insights being offered.
It's all about keeping that engagement high through the dense material.
Let's summarize the core takeaways from our analysis today so these actionable insights can be applied to the material. First, we need to pull the existential threat of continuous transaction controls forward into the introduction.
Front and center.
By moving this from the conclusion to the opening and explaining the real-time mechanisms that make Excel fundamentally incompatible with future tax mandates, we establish immediate high-stakes urgency. It frames the entire architectural discussion as a strategic survival mandate rather than a mere efficiency upgrade.
Second, we must add a human-centric fourth condition to proposed architectural solutions. The author brilliantly diagnoses the loss of tacit knowledge as a reason transformations fail, but leaves humans out of the cure.
Right.
Adding condition 4, institutionalized logic and devolved governance, addresses the extraction of that tacit knowledge and explicitly details the promotion of the manual data prepper into an automation architect. This makes the solution as comprehensive as the diagnosis.
Finally, we need to break up the repetitive formatting by introducing vivid scenario-based descriptions of the friction finance teams face, like that late-night semantic alignment struggle. We vary the rhetorical structure.
Grounds it in reality.
Exactly. This grounds the abstract technical jargon in visceral human reality, preventing the reader from skimming past the critical technical insights.
These are phenomenal source materials. They are built on a foundation of deep, hard-won expertise in finance transformation. We highly encourage the author to implement these structural and narrative enhancements and submit their revised work back to us for another critique. We would love to see how this piece evolves.
Because ultimately, an architecture failure in a piece of writing is just like an architecture failure in an enterprise system. When you notice engagement dropping, you don't blame the reader. You look under the hood. You rewire the logical connections, you extract the tacit knowledge, and you build a narrative vehicle capable of delivering your insights at the speed the modern landscape demands.